Hey, 2020 is the 75th anniversary of 1945, so I thought I would share some World War II stories that we've heard at the Veterans Breakfast Club over the years. And one that I started telling a lot at the end of last year was a story about two veterans who used to come to our events when we first started doing them in 2008, 2009, 2010. And they were members, they were unusual World War II veterans because they were submariners or submariners. They both served together. They were both from Pittsburgh, and they served together in on the same sub. And it wasn't just any sub, it was the USS Barb. Now, if you know anything about submariners, they're a different breed of veterans. I learned that when I went to Bremerton, Washington several weeks ago for the decommissioning of the USS Pittsburgh, which is a submarine. I had a lot of conversations with submarine vets and found just how different they are. They have not very much regard for rank. They have a lot of regard for skill. And they also put an absolute premium on people who are able to work as a team and have a lot of respect for the machinery and the submarine that kind of holds their life in a balance. So these were two World War II veterans, submarine veterans. Donald Miller was one and Neal Sever was the other. And they served on this very special World War II submarine, the USS Barb. And the Barb has gone down in history as the ship in the U.S. fleet that sank more tonnage of enemy ships than any other. I think, almost 100,000 tons of ships. Probably, and I've heard different figures. I've read different figures about the numbers of ships that the Barb sank. Some say 17 or as high as 30 different ships during the war. Served in the Atlantic and the Pacific, 12 different patrols, all the way from Operation Torch, the landing in North Africa, really to the end of the war in the Pacific. The intrepid commander of the Barb for many of these patrols was a captain named Eugene Fluckey. He later became a rear admiral. He was distinguished with the Medal of Honor for his, I think, the 11th patrol, or maybe it was a group of patrols that the Barb was on. But it's a storied ship, and it's a storied submarine. And we had two veterans who served on it. And they told the story of the Barb's last patrol, which was in July 1945. And it was the 12th patrol. It just came after the 11th patrol the previous month. And the 11th patrol was history making. The 11th patrol, I think it was the first time that a rocket had been fired from a submarine. And that was an idea, a plan that Fluckey himself had. He thought that he wanted to prove that submarines could launch missiles or rockets. And so they got up to the Japanese coast and they fired some rockets and destroyed some targets on land. And that was the first time that rockets or missiles had been fired from a submarine. So that was a history-making patrol in itself. But the 12th patrol, there was nothing like this one. It was clear that Fluckey and the crew wanted to kind of cap the war with kind of the ultimate mission, and that was they were about 1,000 yards off the coast of a remote part of Japan, the eastern shore of Japan, and they spotted trains going back and forth right along the coast, and knew that these trains were probably carrying equipment and supplies and maybe even weapons for the defense of the homeland. The invasion of the Japanese main islands was about to come. So Fluckey said instead of trying to destroy the rails or fire a rocket at it, he cooked up this idea, or one of his crewmen cooked up this idea of landing a demolition squad on shore and having this demolition squad plant some kind of demolition on the rails and blowing up the train. That was the idea. And it was kind of crazy because submarines were not equipped with demolitions at all. I think they had some scuttle charges on ship, but that's all that they had. So the idea was they would recruit 8 volunteers who would go on this dangerous mission in rubber rafts. The Barb would stay up about 1,000 yards offshore, and it would wait for 3 hours for the mission to be completed. If the mission was not completed in 3 hours, the Barb was going to leave because the sun would be rising. The Barb would have to disappear and, disappear under the water. And those 8 poor sailors on the mission would just be on their own. There were volunteers came forward. Fluckey requested that every volunteer be a Boy Scout and preferably an Eagle Scout. so that they could survive on land if they had to. And he preferred that the volunteers also be unmarried. And one of the volunteers who came forward was Neal Sever from Pittsburgh, who came to our Veterans Breakfast Club events. We had it at the Crown Plaza on Fort Couch Road in Bethel Park, southern suburb of Pittsburgh. And there he was. He was there live in the flesh, and he told the story of volunteering to be one of the 8 members of this crew and of this mission. He fit the bill. He was from Iowa. He had been orphaned. He had joined the Navy at age 17. He had boarded the Flucky at age 18. The Navy kind of was his family. And he volunteered for this mission. He said the one problem he had with the mission was that he wanted a signal to be a whistle, to be a bird call, and he couldn't quite master the whistle. And Flucky warned him, if you can't do the whistle, you're going to be out. I'll substitute you for the quartermaster. And but he mastered the whistle, and on the night of July 23rd, 1945, he and 7 other sailors descended into 2 rubber rafts in the pitch of night, a moonless night, rowed their way to shore, went between 2 houses, went across a railroad track, under a guard tower, past another guard who was asleep, and set the demolition charge. Now, they had made the demolition charge out of scuttle charges, 55-pound charge that they had. This is all jerry-rigged. And had it in a pickle can or a pickle jar, I believe, an empty pickle jar, pickle can. And they had kind of fashioned a detonator so that when the train came over, the detonator would be depressed and it would blow up the train. So they set it, they snuck back to their rafts, and shortly before dawn, they're rowing back to the USS Barb, just 1,000 yards offshore, and boom, a northbound train goes over the track and is blown into the air. 200 feet into the air. Pieces of the train are coming down in the water as these intrepid sailors are rowing their way back to the Barb. They descend into the Barb, they disappear under the water, and this was the only ground operation in Japan that the U.S. managed to pull off in all of World War II. This was it. 8 sailors, that was it. And we had one of them come to our breakfast, share the story. And we didn't record it. And Neal Sever passed away in 2012. So that story was lost. The people in the room got the pleasure of hearing it, but nobody else. I can't share it with you. And it was really things like that, losing these kind of stories that convinced us how important it was to record our events, to get these stories recorded so that we could share them with you and share them with the country and the world, because these stories are our history. So if you want to read more about the exploits of the USS Barb, a good source is Eugene Flucky's own book about it, Thunder Below. It has the story of the adventure on July 23rd, 1945. And if you want to keep on hearing more of these veteran stories and history, please do follow or subscribe the Veterans Breakfast Club, and I'll talk to you again soon.